Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Tamako Isbay. And tonight we're going to do the house in Fata Morgana once again. We are reading through the short stories. We've been through 6 of them so far, which are the 5 over here on the left side and then Pain. So now we are on to Boy Meets Girl. So let's go ahead and start with this one. Alright, so what could this one be? Might it be the time when Mel meets the white-haired girl, possibly? Could it be when Yukimasa meets Paulina? I hope not. I don't want it. I hate anything that involves those 2 fucking characters. Alright. Oh no? Okay, no, we're talking about Michelle here, apparently. Yeah, I don't know. Alright. Michelle was bored out of his mind. His family had always been very overprotective, but at the age of 10, he was still afforded a lot of freedom. He wasn't quite old enough to have to start acting like an adult yet, and in light of what fate had in store for him much later, this would turn out to be one of the happier periods of his life. Even as a child, Michel understood his place within the Bollinger family. He was obedient and did his best not to step on anyone else's toes, but bottling up his desires for so long put them at risk of blowing up, especially on days like this where there was an opening. His mother, who said, "Listen to your mother," as though it were part of her breathing, just so happened to be out of the house. So he wanted to do something different, to let out all his pent-up boredom. He wanted to make this into a day he would remember, and since his mother had taken many of the servants with her, there was no one to get on his case if he acted out a bit. However, he had no idea what to do with this newfound free time. It was just drifting past him, every passing moment, another moment wasted. I'll just have to ask George. He may have been a precocious child, but Michelle was still a child nonetheless, and he genuinely believed his brother would have some idea of what to do. If his eldest brother Didier had been around, Michel could have gone to play chess with him or watched him train, but regrettably only his eccentric middle brother was home. 10 days earlier, George had proclaimed he was going to paint a masterpiece. Michel hadn't seen him since. Maybe he was dead. That would kinda suck. Michel didn't want to have to deal with reporting a body. Though in all seriousness, his brother was probably just in his special place and had lost track of time. Michel made his way to his brother's room, a process that would usually involve running into a half-dozen servants. But today, The Bollinger estate was quiet as a graveyard. He felt like humming as he walked through the corridors, but couldn't think of any songs. If only he wasn't so ignorant about the arts and recreation, maybe he wouldn't be such a horribly boring person. But today, Michelle wasn't in the mood for those kinds of depressing thoughts. He stood before the door to his brother's room, knocked timidly, and then let himself in. "Hey, George, do you have—" he said, but he was unable to finish the sentence. His brother was splayed out on the floor like a corpse. He really had found a body. Michelle stood in the doorway, frozen and useless like one of his brother's sculptures. The air in the room was stale from having been closed for so long. George! After several long minutes, Michelle was finally able to use his voice again. He ran over to the body and dropped to his knees, shaking his brother's shoulders, on the verge of tears. This was his punishment for saying it would suck having to deal with a dead body. "George, please come back to me. What happened?" "Ha! Ah!" The corpse lurched forward, causing a breeze that stunk of paint. Michelle shuffled backwards on his knees, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it would jump out of his chest. George gazed stupidly at his in-progress painting, heaving a heavy sigh. Are you okay, George? Maybe you should get some rest." "Oh, I didn't see you there, Michelle." Michelle wanted to disappear. He felt like an idiot for getting so worked up over someone only to have them see straight past him. "That's all you have to say after worrying me like that?" "Huh? I was just sleeping. Nothing to worry about." "Your bed is for sleeping, not the floor." George chortled. "Did you need something?" "Oh, yes," Michelle said. "Mother and most of the servants are out of the house for the day." "There's some kind of trouble?" No trouble." George tilted his head until it was almost horizontal. A few moments later, he clapped loudly and said, "Aha! So you're bored." He was right, but Michelle couldn't bring himself to just say, "Yes, I'm bored, please give me attention." So he averted his eyes and said instead, "I would not say I am bored, but it's just so rare for the house to be so empty, and I—" George chuckled. "You're right," he said with an impish smirk. Michelle braced himself, fearing his brother was going to tease him. "We all need a change of pace every once in a while. Some real excitement to mix things up. I've been running short on inspiration these last few days, too." So he was not ready for what his brother said instead. "Let's go out on the town," George proclaimed. At which Michelle went positively bug-eyed. Now, this is a point that bears repeating. Michelle's family was very overprotective of him, in part because he was so sensitive to the sun, but mostly because he was a daughter of noble blood. He wasn't a vampire, so the sun wouldn't kill him, but because of the circumstances of his birth, he was almost never allowed to go into the city. If he was lucky, he got to go down once a year, but always for some kind of business. The city was like a giant cave filled with gold and jewels, but guarded by a big, ferocious, poisonous dragon, and he could only ever see a little bit of it. So he was thrilled. So much so that had he been raised with fewer hawks watching over him, he probably would have broken into dance, and maybe even a musical number. But he knew how to restrain himself, and restrain himself he did. When they arrived at the capital's central district, it was much busier than Michelle had expected. There were people everywhere, going every which way, doing anything and everything and even more. Someone was shouting from a shop, trying to attract customers. Their voice was rough and deep and loud, nothing like the quietly refined voices of everyone at home. A cat sat perched atop a barrel, covered in filth, glaring at Michelle with eyes that seemed to glow. His mother would probably hate this. Her anxiety was too strong. Ugh. Need to grab this blanket, cover my feet. She would say it was too loud and unrefined, refusing to even set foot here. But Michelle thought there was beauty specifically in the discord. George laughed merrily at the sight of Michelle looking around in wonder. "Looks like we're in for even more excitement than we bargained for," George exclaimed. "Is it not safe here in the city?" "Oh, heck no, it ain't. You let your guard down for 3 seconds and you're dead meat. Don't listen to anyone who says they have something good for you. Hear me? 9 times out of 10, they're gonna toss you in a big black cauldron and eat you right up. That's just how it is in the big city." "What?" Michelle went pale as a ghost, and 3 seconds later, George burst out laughing. He'd been tricked. Michelle flushed bright red. His cheeks were getting quite a workout today. "If there's anyone I shouldn't listen to, it's you, George." "I ain't lying. Just playing a little joke, that's all. Only a little kid would fall for that." One of these days, Michelle was going to get George back, beat him at his own game. "This," his brother said, giving him a quick wink, "this is the excitement I was talking about." He placed an outstretched finger on Michelle's chest, right above his heart, and pushed gently. "There's gonna be some real fireworks if anyone realizes who you are." He was right. Michelle's mother would tear his head off if she found out her daughter was wandering around town in commoner's clothing. He wore a battered brown robe instead of an elaborate dress, and his hair was tied up and hidden inside a hat. At a glance, no one would clock him as a noble girl, but he still felt awkward and out of place, and people were more likely to notice that. George, meanwhile, had done this before, and he really owned the commoner look. If Michel didn't know better, he would think his brother was traveling troubadour or something. You really are a strange man, George. You just now figuring that out, kid? No, just... That's part of my charm. I hope one day I can be as confident as you. George was probably the only person in that house who considered trouble fun. If Michel had asked one of the servants to help sneak him into the city, they would have certainly taken off running, shouting about how they didn't want to lose their head. As a Bollinger himself, George would likely be allowed to keep his head, but even he wouldn't get off scot-free for this. Michel was glad he had George here with him. He didn't say that, though. Partly from embarrassment, and partly because he knew he'd be teased for it. So, where should we go? Want to hit the pub, grab some cheap booze, and toss silver at the bard? Maybe we should ease into things. That's a lot to start with. It's not like I'm taking you to a monster's den. Just relax. It'll be fun. A pub is still no place for children. Come on. I may be a dunce, but I'm not dumb enough to take you to some seedy back alley joint. Most of the pubs along this main road are basically restaurants during the day. Some even have inns in them. There'll be lots of very nice people. If you say so. Michel was less comforted and more terrified at the prospect of there being lots of people, but part of him was still interested. Not to mention, he wouldn't be going alone. So he gave a hesitant nod. If you're scared, you can always hold my hand, George said. Forward march, my young soldier. Follow my lead. Michel wasn't happy about his sprightly, airheaded brother playing him like a fiddle, but this was a battle his pride couldn't win. Holding onto his brother's pant leg, they set off down the bustling street together. But not for long. Michel stood flummoxed in the middle of the street. He looked left. No George. Right? No George. Had he gotten lost? No way. He had been right there just moments ago. There were just too many people around, and he'd lost sight of his brother for a second. He wasn't lost yet. Michel was better than that. He would never get lost. But his pride couldn't change reality. They were on their way to the pub when George had run into a girl he knew and started talking. It didn't seem like they were going to finish any time soon, so Michel had decided to wander around and explore the area. One thing led to another, and now he'd completely lost sight of his brother. Refusing to accept that he was lost, Michelle started chasing after people the same height and build as George. When one turned out to be wrong, he went after another, and another, and before he knew it, he was well off the main road with no idea how to get back. This area was much quieter than the main street. Not being familiar with cities, Michelle couldn't tell if it was a good kind of quiet or a bad one, though. Maybe he'd just wandered from the trade district to the residential one. Or maybe he'd ended up in some back alley where no one could hear him scream. If the latter, he needed to get out of there, and fast. Back alleys were the home of ruffians and other unseemly types, after all. And who knew what they would do if they found out he was a noble? That, compounded with the fact that he was too shy to ask for help, and too self-conscious to let himself be seen crying or even shaking, left him stuck there just biting his lip. Ugh, why did none of my books say what to do when you get lost? And soon enough, he was directing his frustration at innocent bystanders. But then, he caught sight of a stout woman around his mother's age, watching him intently. 9 times out of 10, they're gonna toss you in a big black cauldron and eat you right up. George's words played back in Michelle's mind. He knew it was a lie, and the woman appeared rather friendly and not at all like a child-devouring witch, but Michelle was all alone right now, so everyone seemed dangerous. He was like a high-strung cat. Michelle glared back at the woman, so she knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. And as soon as they locked eyes, she spoke. He couldn't make any sense of what she said, though. My, look at you two little sweethearts. Shopping together? You're so grown up. What? 2 little sweethearts? Was she trying to disorient him by spouting nonsense so she could kidnap him while his guard was down and demand a ransom from his family? Hey, mister, came a voice as something tugged on his robe. He spun around to find a small girl looking up at him and sucking her thumb, evidently the source of the voice. Who are you? She asked. No, who are you? He stared at her, flummoxed for the second time that day. My daddy got lost, the girl said. I think you mean you got lost. Are you lost too, mister? No, it's my brother who's lost. We're the same. My situation is nowhere near as bad as yours, thank you. Michelle listened to what the girl had to say, doing his best not to explode at her. She was apparently 3 years old and had gotten separated from her father while out shopping. His hands were full enough trying to figure out what to do with himself. The last thing he needed was to have to look after a lost toddler on top of that. He really should have asked the woman for help as soon as he'd noticed her, but by the time he'd collected himself enough to do anything, she'd already said goodbye and disappeared. Unable to find her again, Michelle was stuck dealing with the calamity all on his own. He couldn't just leave her there either, as much as he didn't want to deal with it. He was the older one here, and he had to set a good example for her. So Michelle bent down to match the girl's eye level and said, "Let's get you home. I'll help you find it." "Can you remember anything near your home that might help us find it?" Michelle asked. The girl ummed and uh'd for several minutes before shouting, "Oh, I do!" "Perfect. What is it?" Maybe this whole lost kid ordeal would be over sooner than expected. He let out a sigh of relief. "A brown cat!" Which immediately turned into a sigh of disappointment. "Cats move," Michelle said. "It has really mean eyes." "Oh, forget about the cat already. Can you think of anything that doesn't move?" I know. Monsieur Casimir is always sitting outside." "No people either." "Aw, why not?" "He never ever moves from his favorite spot." "I need something easier to find, like a building or something." "Oh, there are lots of buildings," the girl exclaimed. "The lady next door has a big flower garden. They're really pretty and red." "No, not like that. Ugh. No one's going to know about your neighbor's flower garden. There has to be something big that anyone would—" Michelle realized he was getting genuinely angry and stopped himself there. The girl's eyes had gotten wide and watery, and it looked like the dam could burst at any second. He closed his eyes and shook his head, disappointed in himself. Here he was getting mad at a 3-year-old girl who was just doing her best to answer his questions. "Are you mad at me?" she asked. No, I'm not mad at you." Michelle took a deep breath, letting it out slowly to release some of his frustration. He needed to adjust his expectations. She was just a little kid, and she wasn't always going to know the right thing to say. "What am I supposed to do then?" He'd been raised in an almost complete isolation from the world, with only adults around to interact with. Even his brothers were a good deal older than him, so he'd never been in a situation where there were so many barriers to communication. And he was utterly clueless as to how to handle it. Would he actually even be able to help the girl get home? "Gems," said the girl out of nowhere, interrupting Michelle's train of thought. She reached her soft, pudgy little hand up and patted his cheek with it, right beneath his eye. "Good night." At which he froze, dumbstruck. One second, she was on the verge of tears. The next, her eyes were glimmering inquisitively. What was she even talking about? Where did gems come from? "This is just how little kids are, I guess. I wonder if I was like this at her age too." Do your eyes hurt? She asked. Huh? Why would they? Because you've got gems in them. Oh, so that's what she meant. His red eyes. Michelle understood now, but he wasn't very thrilled about the topic. He didn't like the color of his eyes or his hair or his skin. It was all because of them that he had to be holed up his whole life. That's just what color my eyes are. There are no gems in them, and it doesn't hurt. Wow, they're so pretty. Pretty. Michelle blushed a little at the compliment, despite thinking just moments ago he would rather talk about literally anything else. He received compliments on his eyes often enough from his mother and the servants, but this was the first time one had ever felt genuine, with nothing behind it. When his mother said his eyes were pretty, she was envisioning him as an angel sent down to earth. When the servants did it, it was because of their status. They were never saying it about him and only him. But the girl, she was. There was no jealousy or pity or scorn or anything else to her words. She was simply excited about eyes she thought were pretty. I think normal eyes are much prettier myself, he said, without a hint of sarcasm in his voice. Okay, let's go somewhere where there's more people to start with, he continued. Michelle stood up, hesitated for at least for a few moments, and then extended his hand. The girl grabbed it excitedly, which made him feel like he was the only one anxious about the whole thing. I'll come with you, mister. You need someone to help you find your brother. You're the one who's lost, remember? Wait, mister? Right? Oh, Michelle just now realized that she had been calling him Mister this entire time. He'd forgotten that George had dressed him up like a boy, saying it was safer that way. How was he supposed to feel in this situation? Upset that she'd guessed wrong? Embarrassed? Ashamed of himself for deceiving her? The emotion that welled up in his chest was none of those, though. Instead, Michelle felt something that seemed entirely inexplicable at the time. A mixture of joy and pride at someone finally acknowledging him for who he was. A faint smile spread across his face. Yes, I'm a boy, he said, letting each word linger on his lips. It felt so much better than any comment about his eyes. They wound their way down the streets, Michelle occasionally working up the courage to ask someone for directions, and after repeating the process several times, they finally made it back onto the main road. Michelle wasn't sure if it was the same road where he had gotten separated from George, though. The capital was massive, and it seemed like every other street was called Main Street. As they stepped out into the throng, the clock struck noon. The pealing of the bell brought with it another wave of people. They looked to be artisans of all sorts, heading out for their lunch breaks. Apparently, this main street collected a bunch of workshops on it. The artisans were all big men with even bigger arms. Their profession was making things by hand, and you had to be well built to do the job well. Michel found himself enchanted by the parade of musicals, following each new one with his eyes as they passed by. Do you want to be like them, mister? I don't know. I haven't really thought about my future much. Michel grimaced. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about it, but that he simply didn't want to. He knew all too well that he could never be an artisan, or a knight, or even a plumber. I kinda wanna be a craftsman, the girl said. They can make anything they want. Girls can't be craftsmen. Why not? Well, that was just how the world worked. Those were the rules, and you had to follow them. End of story. Michel was only 10, and he knew that. He knew what a girl's role was, and soon enough, she would come to know all that as well. That growing up meant giving up on your dreams. I'm not sure, actually. At first, he just didn't want to shatter a 3-year-old girl's hopes. But the more he thought about it, the more dissatisfied he felt with the system too. Why didn't he get to choose how to live his own life? Why did he have to be stuck on this dark and narrow road to his whole life path? Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm sorry I'm making mistakes reading, because man, I'm like a wave of sleepiness has like taken me over all of a sudden. Okay, that should say, why did he have to be stuck on this dark and narrow road his whole life? What would you want to make as a craftsman? Michel asked, to take his mind off his own dead-end future. The girl's eyes lit up. Leather sandals and bags, she proclaimed. That's quite practical. He had assumed she would say something more cute and frivolous, like toys and sweets, or even something completely outrageous like the stars. So we can put them out. Put them out? Not put them on? Wait. Was she... Does your family run a shop? Yep. Okay, so she was the daughter of a merchant, which meant they were probably close. The artisans' workshops and the merchants' shops were likely to be set up near one another. Michelle looked down to ask if she recognized anything in the area. But before he could, she shouted, "Ah!" and let go of his hand, dashing into the bustling street. Hey, wait! If he lost sight of her now, he would probably never find the girl again. So he ran off after her, slamming into a large, muscular man only a few seconds later. "Watch it!" the man shouted, his voice so powerful Michelle thought it might send him flying. His gut tightened. No one had ever yelled at him like that before, but he wasn't going to stop just because he got a little scared. He'd only met the girl earlier that day, and he didn't even know her name, but he was determined to get her back to her parents. Giving up now wasn't an option for him. The girl weaved through the crowds effortlessly, like a sprite out of a story. Meanwhile, Michelle was crashing into people every 3 steps and was beginning to fear he was actually making negative progress. At long last, he made it through the river of people and caught sight of her again. But what he saw made his jaw drop. She charged at an older man, latching onto his leg. The man looked down at her, his eyes narrowed as if he was frowning, or about to start crying. He was very clearly the girl's father. Good Lord, what the fuck? In addition to his relief at their reunion, he also found himself surprised at the father's reaction. His only image of a father was a strict and impassive man, not someone who would show so much concern and compassion for his daughter. His father cared more about putting on an appearance of strength than showing love for his family. He would certainly never cry over one of his kids. That would make him look weak. And Michelle had always thought that was just how fathers were. But there was nothing weak about the girl's father being so happy to have her back. "Are you the one that followed my little pumpkin?" Her father walked over to where Michelle was standing, grabbed both of his hands, and shook them up and down enthusiastically. Thank you ever so much. I just about had a heart attack when I saw she was gone. Oh, I'm so glad she's safe, he said, and then kept going and going until Michelle felt like his arms were going to come off. You're welcome. That's enough. When the man finally let him go, Michelle's arms had gone numb. I'm ever so sorry, he said, scratching his head in embarrassment. I got too excited. The girl, hanging off her father's leg like a koala, said, "Don't get lost anymore, Daddy." You're the one who got lost, Pumpkin, he said with a sigh. But he was too relieved to be angry at her, and his frown turned into right upside down. Michelle let out a satisfied sigh at the sight of them. He'd completed his mission successfully, despite the trouble he'd run into along the way, and everything was all back to normal now. So, did you bring her here all by yourself? The man asked. Everything was all back to normal, in the sense that he was finally back at square one. He still had his original problem to deal with. I was here with my brother, he said timidly, but we got split up. See? Oh, sorry. See, I knew you were lost, mister, the girl said. Erg. He wanted to say he knew exactly where he was, but he knew an adult would see right through him. So he stared down at his feet in shame, at which her father let out a hearty laugh and set a hand on his head. We'll help you find your brother then. He's probably having a heart attack right about now too. He's not worried, Michelle said under his breath, but secretly he hoped the girl's father was right. Michelle told the girl's dad they were going to a pub on the main street, and just a few minutes later, they were standing across the street from it. It was amazing how much quicker it was when you had someone who knew the area to show you along the way. Sorry. To show you the way. And it made Michelle feel that much worse about all the time he spent wandering through the back streets. Like George had said, the pub acted as a restaurant during the day, and it was packed to the brim with men on their lunch breaks. Eating had always been a quiet affair in Michelle's life, so this was a brand new experience for him. It felt like he'd come to a festival. Before long, they caught sight of a man pacing back and forth in front of the building. It was his brother, George. and when he spotted Michelle, he frantically ran over, shouting, Michelle! So frantically, in fact, he tripped over his own feet and face-planted halfway there. But the bigger a fool George made of himself, the happier it made Michelle. "What did I tell you?" the girl's father said, patting him on the shoulder. "George?" "Yeah?" After things had settled down and they'd parted ways with the girl and her father, George and Michelle sat down for a late lunch. It was a very primitive meal, consisting of thin pieces of torn meat, placed on slices of bread and eaten with only your hands. Michelle was having a great deal of difficulty with it. "Were you worried about me?" he asked, trying to be as casual as possible. George took a swig of some watery wine to wash down what he had in his mouth, then pounded his chest a few times. He swallowed, opened his mouth, and let out an impressively colossal belch. Michelle had never seen his brother act so unrefined, but apparently that kind of behavior was allowed here. It seemed to even be the norm. "The heck you talking about, kid? Of course I was. I just about had a heart attack when I saw you were gone." "That was more excitement than you signed up for, huh? Mother would be very unhappy with you." "I mean, yeah, I don't want to go through another one of her lectures," George said with a strained laugh. He looked softer and more affectionate than his usual vivacious self. "But mostly, I was scared something would happen to you, Michelle." Michelle's hand froze in midair, holding a piece of the meat-on-bread thing. "I thought you would just laugh it off if you lost me, honestly." "What do you think I am, some kind of cold-hearted monster?" "I'm just joking," Michelle said, sneaking a peek at his brother's pouting face over his meat. He wanted to give a nice, hearty laugh, but the most he could manage was a restrained smile. And for a child who didn't smile much at all, he'd done quite a bit of that today. "Hey, George." "Yeah?" "I'm sorry for disappearing on you like that." George's jaw dropped. "Well, I'll be damned. I never thought I'd hear you apologize for anything, Michelle." "What do you think I am? Some sort of emotionless hobgoblin?" "I'm just pulling your leg. I'm sorry for not keeping a better eye on you, too." "Maybe if you weren't so busy looking at every single girl we walked past, that wouldn't have been a problem." Come on. Don't twist the knife. That's where we're supposed to hug and say, yeah, we both messed up." George put his face in his hands and faked crying for a few seconds, and when he looked up again, he had a big smile on his face, which put a little bit of one on Michelle's as well. His father would never panic like that, no matter what happened to Michelle. He was too concerned about appearances, but his brother was different. George got scared for him, almost cried for him, panicked so much he made a complete fool of himself. And that was enough. Michelle didn't have to be jealous of the girl and her father. His family loved him too, and he was happy he'd had the chance to see so for himself. Hey, George. Yeah? Let's do this again sometime. Heck yeah. Next time Mom and Dad are out and our scary big brother are out, let's go. It was extremely rare that they were all out of the house at the same time, so it was possible there would never be a next time. But Michelle still dreamed of the day it would happen. Even if it was a few years from now, as long as this wasn't the last time, he would be happy. And when he came back, he would go see that girl again. He'd go find her family's shop, and if there was a pair of leather sandals in a bag for sale, he'd buy them. And then he'd ask the girl what her name was. Would she even remember him in a few years? Would he even remember her in a few years? In all likelihood, neither of them would remember this day, but a little dream didn't hurt anyone. He could still feel her soft hands in his, and he could still see her big, inquisitive eyes, like two little balls of glimmering jade. That was a pretty mess story. Alright. Well, that story only took about, what, half an hour to read through. So, we'll go ahead and read through another one. Man. Usually not this tired at 10:30, but Alright, well, let's move on to Silent Night. Oh wait, Lonely Night. Never mind. It's not Holy Night. Silent Night, Lonely Night. Okay. So, another Michelle story, it looks like. Michelle was even gloomier than usual. His ruby eyes gazed down at a letter from his mother. If it were a year prior, he would have been crying, or shouting, or throwing furniture. But nowadays, I rarely saw him explode at anything. And I preferred him this way. Getting loud and emotional over every little thing was what ordinary men did. But beneath Michelle's gypsum skin flowed blood divine as mine. He was above them, and it did not befit him to behave as they did. Brooding in silence was much more appropriate behavior. I sat at the desk beside him, my chin resting on my hand. Michelle could not see me there, though. Not that I wanted to watch him grimace in disgust at the horrifying scars on my face, of course. Michelle, my dear. What? That was unexpected. He almost never responded to me anymore. Perhaps he wanted someone to speak with in his present tribulation. Michelle briefly looked around the room for me. But no matter how hard he searched, his eyes would never find mine. You should hang it up, I said. Are you out of your mind? I'm just teasing you. I gave a little laugh, agitating him further. Today, his family had sent him Christmas decorations. First, a handmade, probably by his mother, white floral wreath. A lovely thing that a young girl might like. Then, there was a doll in frilly clothing, also intended for a girl. I expected Michelle to toss it all in the fireplace this evening, but merely destroying it wouldn't erase the fact that he'd received it, nor that his mother would be expecting a response, not from Michelle, but Michelle. Despite my repeatedly asking her not to, my mother continues to send me these Christmas boxes as it gets cold. I'm starting to hate even the thought of Jesus Christ. You should direct your anger at your family, not the Holy Savior. Yes, I realize it's misplaced, but you could easily solve this with a curse. Just say the word. And you need to stop offering me that. As you wish. Michelle had changed a great deal since his first arrival at the mansion. But that was one thing he stubbornly refused to budge on. Did he really care about his family that much? He seemed to have drawn a line in the sand and convinced himself that if he stepped over it, he would be surrendering his humanity. But what he needed to realize was that he never had any chance to lose in the first place, so his concern was entirely irrelevant. I would spare him that lecture today, though. He was busy racking himself over the letter and Christmas. Michelle! What? Having grown tired of resting my chin on my hand, I was now sitting on top of the desk, looking down at him. Again, he looked around for me with no luck. Tell me about Christmas. Your family lives on a rather large estate, don't they? Larger than this little mansion, at least. You don't have to if you don't want to. It's just talking about when I was happy only makes me feel even worse now. I can understand that, I suppose. Michelle had ever been happy? My family was too poor to put up Christmas decorations or do anything special for Epiphany. What gifts did he received from the villagers as all went straight to my mother, and I saw none of it. Though earthly desires were wrong, I believed, so I was hardly bothered by that. I was one who gave to those in need, after all. Michelle, my dear. What? He glanced slightly upward, so close, but still not quite able to find me. Just saying your name. He appeared mildly annoyed, but didn't say anything in protest. Perhaps he thought it wouldn't make a difference, or had simply gotten used to be calling his name for the sake of it. Ugh. Regardless, he reluctantly dropped his gaze back to the letter on the desk. I decided to leave him alone. He didn't seem willing to share his Christmas experiences, and I had nothing else to talk about. Morgana. Yes? That caught me off guard. Michelle almost never initiated. I tilted my head, even though I knew he couldn't see it. Do you, he said, want to celebrate Christmas? Is that it? Had he lost his mind? At what point had I ever said I wanted to celebrate the holiday? While I was busy being flabbergasted, Michelle stood up and took the wreath in his hand. He then began searching the area for me. Where are you? Right here. That doesn't help me. Where's your head? Am I close? He asked, waving his hand around in the air. That's my shoulder, I said, still not certain what he was trying to do. How about here? A little higher. Here? Yes, right there. Holding one hand there in the air, he took the other, the one holding the wreath, and brought it up to the same level, placing it right above my head. An awkward silence hung in the air for a few seconds as I failed to grasp what had just happened. Wreaths in my family were worn as headdresses. When I made one, I would place it on my mother's head like this. They're gifts for the women of the house. I'm glad you're here, so I can pretend this was a gift for you instead. What are you... You asked about my family's Christmas. No, that wasn't what I meant. Why was he doing this? He went quiet for a moment, then smiled, which was all the answer I needed. It was a very self-defeating smile, not meant for me. Laughing at himself for putting so much weight on only one of the wreath's potential meanings. In sorrow for the family who refused to accept him. I made a very similar smile. Flowers would never befit me, after all. Not with one arm violently severed and the other nothing but bone. I could never be the innocent little girl laughing with flowers in her hair. I have no interest in your wreath. Throw it in the fire. That's probably for the best, yes. And what we learned in that moment was that Christmas would never be a happy occasion for us. That said, it was better than I had expected nonetheless. We shared a certain energy there, staring in silence. A solitary, capitulatory, desolate energy. Michelle, my dear. What? I turned up to look at him, wreath still in his hands, and he looked down in turn, this time matching my gaze correctly. He wasn't really looking into my eyes, though. He just happened to know where they were because I had told him. But I was fine with that. Would you like me to write that letter to your mother in your stead? What do you mean? I mean, I dictate what you will say. All you have to do is write it down and sign it Michelle. It won't be something you wrote, so I imagine doing it that way will take much of the pressure off. He didn't seem certain what to make of the proposal. I'd never suggested anything like it before, and well... Oh my gosh, I'm so freaking sleepy now, I can barely read this. I'd never suggested anything like it before, and I likely never would again. You're going to ask me for something in return, aren't you? Of course not. What do you think I am? A witch? Well, he was right. But Michelle was a saint like me, so I wasn't particularly fond of him calling me a witch. I was in a forgiving mood today, though, so I decided to let it pass. I know how to show gratitude, thank you very much. Even for a wildly ill-considered floral wreath. I was just fickle, that was all. Sometimes I would have days like this. Most, I would continue trying to bring him over to my side, to curse his family. But occasionally, I would show some kindness. Merry Christmas, Michelle. Okay, these, I don't know, these short stories are starting to get less and less interesting. Alright, well, I don't know why, but I'm just getting really sleepy, so, I think I'm gonna stop here. I mean, so that means we are, what, halfway through the short stories now? So... Oh, actually, not quite yet. We're not quite halfway through. Sorry, I forgot it was 18 of them, not 16. So yeah, we're through 8, and there's 10 left. Alright, well, let me think. I will probably stream this again tomorrow. And we'll read Scarlet in the Coffee House, and maybe we'll go on to some more after that if it's not too long. So, alrighty, well, good night. Thanks for watching.